Good morning and welcome to Sunday School at First Baptist Church. I'm glad you can be here with us today as we continue our study in the book of Hosea. Last week we introduced Hosea to you, and today we get into the real meat of the matter with Hosea's prophecy. He acts like a prosecuting attorney today because he is in court. He's building a case against the people of Israel, the northern kingdom. He says Israel has broken their covenant with God. He declares here that the priests who were supposed to be Israel's spiritual leaders were to blame. They had failed to teach the people about God. They had failed to teach the people about the commandments and about the law. He charged the people, though, with idol worship, accompanied by acts of sexual debauchery. He was incensed at their practices. The people thought these practices would bring them good fortune, but that was not the case. Israel's leaders and the people's stubbornness would cause them shame as they would be carried off into captivity. So after he puts these charges forward, there is a verdict and there is a punishment. And that's what we'll see as we look at today. The real problem is there was no authentic devotion, no authentic acts. They were all sincere acts of worship to Yahweh God. So let's look at the first three verses here in chapter 4 and see where Hosea is going. He says, "Hear the word of the Lord, you Israelites, because the Lord has a charge to bring against you who live in the land. There is no faithfulness, no love, no acknowledgement of God in the land. There's only cursing, lying, and murder, stealing and adultery. They break all bonds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. Because of this, the land mourns, and all who live in it waste away. The beasts of the field and the birds of the air and the fish of the sea are dying." Now pay attention to the first words here. Hear the word of the Lord. John Olin Strange observes that there is a distinctive emphasis in the Scriptures upon hearing the word of the Lord. The prophets gave this admonition repeatedly. Jesus, in the prophetic tradition, said, "Take heed then how you hear," Luke 8:18. The present generation, our generation, often is more interested in how one speaks than how one hears. Yet the proclamation of the gospel is incomplete until it is heard and acted upon. The gospel has to change you. He also says there's no faithfulness, no love, no acknowledgement of God. That's the main problem. Those three things. There's no faithfulness, love, or acknowledgement of God. In the case of the Israelites, God had a charge to bring against them, and Hosea was intent on them hearing about it. The covenant had been broken. The result was a bankrupt religion devoid of moral and ethical demands. They went to church, but it didn't look like it. It didn't look like they were heeding what they were being taught. The three basic elements of the covenant were lacking: faithfulness, kindness, and knowledge. No faithfulness. Now what the word refers to here is to stay, to sustain, to support. It carries with it the connotation of being true. So if something's true, it's something you can rely on. If someone is truthful, you can rely upon them as well. Because there's no faithfulness to God, you can't count on the person delivering the message, and you can't count on the person hearing the message, either one. It is a faithlessness that is evident to Hosea. And then the kindness and the love comes from a Hebrew word that I think you probably often have heard preachers preach about, or Bible study leaders talk about, Hesed, H-E-S-E-D, which is often translated as loving kindness. Dr. Strange calls it one of the greatest words of the Hebrew language, such that all translations really fall short of its full meaning. G. Campbell Morgan refers to it as the stoop which is prompted by love. the stoop. God stoops to love us. It's a love that's not found naturally, but it's one that must be acquired. We come to know something of this love when we encounter God, because God expresses that kind of love and He wants us to imitate it. This is the kind of love which Jesus was speaking about when He answered the question of the Pharisees, "Who is my neighbor?" And then He related the story of the Good Samaritan who helped the man who had fallen to robbers on the road to Jericho. There's no knowledge of God, the people say, and they're not keeping the commandments with faithfulness and love. In Hebrew, the word for knowledge here is referring to an intimate knowledge, such as the knowledge between a husband and a wife. You know one another. But by implication, it also points to a knowledge of God's law. It was something that needed to be taught to the people. The marriage relationship is something that you acquire over time. If the people of Israel had known God in a personal and intimate experience, it would have been evident in their character and their actions. And it just wasn't there. Lloyd Ogilvie writes this in the Preacher's Commentary: "Our purpose and passion as Christians is to know God. Like the people of Israel, to whom Hosea prophesied, truth and mercy, faithfulness and kindness, as well as social righteousness, are missing because we do not know God. We do not know God like we should. The beginning of knowledge of God, our relationship with Him, is when we know that we are known by Him. The psalmist says, 'O Lord, you have searched me and known me,' in 139:1. God knew the psalmist. David knew that when he wrote that. God knows me. He knows my inner being. He knows all about me. So both our understanding and awareness of God are met in the response to our being known absolutely and thoroughly by Him, and then our response to Him. It's important to note at this point, if we're lacking in the knowledge of God, then our character defaults to being shaped by cultural values and not the knowledge of God. That's why we teach children from the cradle. We want children to know about God from the cradle so that they have something to build their life on that is better than this world we live in. The question then must be, what results from missing these elements in the people of Israel? What's happened to them because they don't have it? Well, the verses tell us there's only cursing and lying and murder and stealing. That's the conduct of the people in Israel. It even affects the very land, according to Hosea, because he said the land mourns and all who live in it waste away. The beasts of the field and the birds of the air and the fish of the sea are dying. This sinfulness in which you live and this lack of your association and your being with God and what He wants you to do, it affects everything in the land, the people, and even the land itself. The inevitable result of allowing society to degenerate to the level described here by Hosea is moral chaos and even disruption of nature itself. What a terrible situation. The impact is pervasive across the entire landscape of the society, and it can't be ignored anymore. So in verse 4, he says, "But let no man bring a charge. Let no man accuse another, for your people are like those who bring charges against a priest. You stumble day and night, and the prophets stumble with you. So I will destroy your mother. My people are destroyed from lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I also reject you as my priest. Because you have ignored the law of your God, I will also ignore your children." He's bringing a charge against the priests. Verse 6 in this section is key. The destruction is coming upon Israel because of lack of knowledge. And who was responsible for that lack of knowledge? It was the priests. They should have been teaching the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And specifically, they should have been teaching the law and the commandments. The covenant of Israel was based on the 10 commandments as they were delivered on Mount Sinai, and then the law that was established since then. The consequence of rejecting the knowledge and forgetting the law of God was that God would reject the priests and the prophets who were responsible for imparting that knowledge. It was an unresponsive attitude on the part of the people had come about because of the failure of these religious leaders. And I would say that's important in our churches today. I mentioned this before in my Sunday school lesson. I'm so happy that I go to a church where the pastor stands in the pulpit and he preaches from the Bible. That's our book that we live our life by. The entire Bible is in our hands. And we're better off, really, than the people of this era. They only had the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the law and the commandments. We have the whole book. We have the entire revelation of God. The people of Israel were being destroyed because of lack of teaching by the priest about God, the Torah, and all that had been revealed about Him up to that point in history. Today our problem is not a lack of information about God, but it's people studying that and seeing how God is revealing Himself in the Scripture. Like I said, we have the whole book. We have the full revelation all the way through Jesus Christ. Why would we not take advantage of that? That's why we go to Sunday school. That's why perhaps you're listening to this broadcast. But it goes deeper than that. There's an intimate study that individuals do on their own of the Bible, and I hope that you're doing that. Now look at verse 7. He says, the more the priest increased, the more they sinned against me. They exchanged their glory for something disgraceful. They feed on the sins of my people and relish their wickedness. And it will be like people, like priests, I will punish both of them for their ways and repay them for their deeds. They will eat, but not have enough. They will engage in prostitution, but not increase, because they have deserted the Lord to give themselves to prostitution, it says in the next verse. Now, one of the things that I would point out to you here is where he says, the more the priest increased, the more they sinned. They saw they would make a good living at being a priest. People would bring offerings, and the more people sinned, the more they brought offerings, because they thought the offerings were wiping away their sins, but they were offerings that were not given with a heart that was in tune with God. The other thing that's interesting here is Hosea says they exchanged their glory for something disgraceful. Do you remember reading in Romans 1:25 what Paul said there? They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and they worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator. That's the case right there. They worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator. The more the priest increased, the more the people sinned. Power has a way of corrupting men, even religious leaders. And so priests saw a way for personal gain when people brought more and more offerings. The people were not excused because they were misled. The priests were not excused because they erred. The principle of sin and retribution is operative in the lives of everyone, even the clergy, even the religious leaders. But in this case, it was both the religious leaders and the people. Now, let's continue that thought there in 11 through 14, where the sentence carries over that they gave themselves to prostitution, to old wine and new, which takes away the understanding of my people. They consult a wooden idol and are answered by a stick of wood. A spirit of prostitution leads them astray. They're unfaithful to their God. They sacrifice on the mountaintops and burn offerings on the hills, under oak, poplar, and terebinth, where the shade is pleasant. Therefore your daughters turn to prostitution, and your daughters-in-law to adultery. I will not punish your daughters when they turn to prostitution, nor your daughters-in-law when they commit adultery, because the men themselves consort with harlots and sacrifice with shrine prostitutes. A people without understanding will come to ruin. Now, right here in verses 11 through 14, Hosea gives us an idea of what's going on in society. Notice how he ties everything together here. Wine confuses a man's will. It takes away his sense. I say that's right. I mean, that's practical knowledge. Amos rebuked men who drank wine in bowls and were unconcerned about their fellow men in Amos 6:6. A general observation is made that the way things work in life, when a man turns to a prostitute and drinks, he acts senselessly. And he's just given an explanation for why the people in society are going astray. Between the two Proverbs of 11 and 14, Hosea condemns the cultic practices in Israel. The religious cult of the Canaanite religion had been adopted by the children of Israel. They thought it had something to do with agricultural success. They thought the fertility rites brought crops that would produce more. And so they participated, they became part of that because they thought this is the way to grow crops. When a nation loses its sense of moral discernment, that nation is doomed. Our nation should beware. Our moral discernment is flowing in the wrong direction. And you can see it every day if you watch the news. Now look at verses 15 through 19. It says, though you commit adultery, O Israel, let not Judah become guilty. Do not go to Gilgal, do not go up to Beth-aven, and do not swear as surely as the Lord lives. The Israelites are stubborn like a stubborn heifer. How then can the Lord pasture them like lambs in a meadow? Ephraim is joined to idols, leave him alone. Even when their drinks are gone, they continue their prostitution. Their rulers dearly love shameful ways. A whirlwind will sweep them away, and their sacrifices will bring them shame. In this passage here, Hosea compares Bethel to Beth-aven. You see, Bethel means house of God. And that's really where he was referring to. That's where they went to worship the two golden calves. And contemptuously, he calls it Beth-aven, the house of vanity. The prophecy here warns the people about where they're headed. He would also warn Judah in the same area here. He says, let not Judah become guilty, to abstain from the same sins that Israel is committing right here. Later on in the passage, we're going to see that he's going to hint to judgment against Judah as well. Now we shift to chapter 5 and look at verses 1 through 7. He says, hear this, you priests. Pay attention, you Israelites. Listen, O royal house. This judgment is against you. You have been a snare at Mizpah, a net spread out at Tabor. The rebels are deep in slaughter. I will discipline all of them. I know all about Ephraim. Israel is not hidden from me. Ephraim, you have now turned to prostitution. Israel is corrupt. Their deeds do not permit them to return to their God. A spirit of prostitution is in their heart. They do not acknowledge the Lord. Israel's arrogance testifies against them. The Israelites, even Ephraim, stumble in their sin. Judah also stumbles with them, so Judah's not exempt. When they go with their flocks and herds to seek the Lord, they will find him. He has withdrawn himself from them. They will not find him. He has withdrawn himself from them. They are unfaithful to the Lord. They give birth to illegitimate children. Now their new moon festivals will devour them and their fields. He's speaking to three groups here. He says, you priests, you Israelites, and the royal family. All of you. These three groups, he's giving fair warning in verse 1. The prophet's plea was to these religious and political leaders. The ones who had judged others were about to be judged. And those who were guilty of leading the people astray would experience God's chastisement. Without fail, they would. Then in verses 8 and following, he says this, sound the trumpet, the horn in Ramah, the trumpet in Gibeah, the horn in Ramah, raise the battle cry in Beth-aven. Lead on, O Benjamin. Ephraim will be laid waste on the day of reckoning. Among the tribes of Israel, I proclaim what is certain. Judah's leaders are like those who move boundary stones. I will pour out my wrath on them like a flood of water. Ephraim is oppressed, trampled in judgment, and intent on pursuing idols. I am like a moth to Ephraim, like rot to the people of Judah. When Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah his sores, then Ephraim turned to Assyria and sent to the great king for help. But he is not able to cure them, not able to heal their sores. For I will be like a lion to Ephraim, like a great lion to Judah. I will tear them to pieces and go away. I will carry them off with no one to rescue them. Then I will go back to my place until they admit their guilt. They will seek my face. In their misery, they will earnestly seek me. Interesting statement in here where he talks about like moth and like rot. I thought about Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, lay up not for yourself treasures on earth where rust and moth can destroy. God is spoken of as actively bringing about that which he permitted to take place. The Hebrews did not think in terms of secondary causes. God was always the primary mover. Forces were slowly at work, slowly but surely destroying. That's what a moth and rot do, destroying both kingdoms. Since sin brings in its own judgment, for Israel, that judgment would come from Assyria, and for Judah, it would come from Babylon. And so he says, like moth, it will be destroyed. Like rot, it will be destroyed. Have you ever painted something at your house like a fascia board and then you realized it was really soft and you pushed on it and your finger went straight through it because it had rotted out? Over the years, you didn't realize it. He said that's what's happening beneath the surface in Israel and in Judah. They're rotting out from the interior. And so we begin what is called the focal passage in our literature in chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. He says, come, let us return to the Lord. He has torn us to pieces, but he will heal us. He has injured us, but he will bind up our wounds. After 2 days, he will revive us. On the third day, he will restore us, that we may live in his presence. Let us acknowledge the Lord. Let us press on to acknowledge him. As surely as the sun rises, he will appear. He will come to us like winter rains, like the spring rains that water the earth. So they've heard the sentence, and they said, here's how we can escape that sentence. Let us return to the Lord. He's torn us to pieces, but he'll revive us in just 2 days, in a short time. In fact, the first 3 verses in chapter 6 furnish us with some insight into what one writer called theological confusion of an unfaithful people. They interpreted these calamities that they'd already been through and the judgment that they had heard as the punishment from God. And so they said, we'll find relief from this predicament and we'll just go back to God and he'll bind up our wounds and he would heal us. However, their idea of mercy presumed on God. It presumed on God's mercy. Dr. Strange says that the words do not contain a confession of sin. And if you look there, there's no confession of sin. It's just, here's how we get out of this. Here's how we get back. They do not contain a prayer of purging or a prayer of cleansing. There's no remorse there for what they have done. They've come to think of God like a kindly and doting grandfather. Now, I am a grandfather, and I can tell you about kindly and doting. All that my grandchildren have to do is say, but Papa, and they can often win. But God's not like that. All they had to do was to make a move toward him, they thought, and he would throw out his arms, receive them, and would forget all. God's not that way. When God says there is judgment coming, there is judgment coming. But always God attaches some mercy to it. They presumed too much on God's mercy, though. Their words were not enough. They saw their judgment as being over a brief period of time. In fact, they thought it would take only a few days, which meant a brief period of time, and then it would be over. It seemed to them that he had withdrawn for a brief interval, but he had returned just like the dawning of a new day. His return would be as refreshing as the showers of rain that come. They would continue to live before Him and enjoy His blessing like a child who's been punished in the classroom, and he has to go and sit in the corner for a while, for a period, and then he comes back in and everything's back to normal. Their religion was bankrupt. It was a bankrupt religion. It was unacceptable to the Lord. Even though Yahweh had cut them asunder with words of the prophets and slew their apostasy with His own words spoken through the prophets, Israel did not return to the Hesed faithfulness and loyalty to Him and the covenant. Yahweh wanted something more than a legalistic, ritualistic return to the traditional worship of Him. Their idea was, if I just go back to church on Sunday, everything's going to be okay. No, there had to be a change of heart. Just going back to church wouldn't do it. There had to be a change of heart. That's what God was looking for. Look in verses 4 through 6. What can I do with you, Ephraim? What can I do with you, Judah? Your love is like the morning mist, like the early dew that disappears. You see, God recognized what they were. Therefore, I cut you in pieces with my prophets. I killed you with the words of my mouth. My judgment flashed like lightning upon you. For I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. You see, they went for the show of the ritual. Their hearts weren't changed. John Olin Strange writes that there must have been turmoil in the heart of God over the superficial religiosity of Ephraim and Judah. Such a shallow and presumptive approach to God is unacceptable. What could God do that He had not done for these covenant people? He had told them what was wrong. He told them what they must do, but they went for the show and not for the real thing. They were like a morning cloud, Hosea said, appearing to be filled with an abundance of rain, but in a little while it disappeared and no rain came. It produced no fruit. They produced no fruit. The Hesed love of the covenant had quickly vanished. Their words had no depth to them. A religious experience without a profound consciousness of sin lacks permanence. I've often heard my father-in-law, Dr. Strange, say that if you go to church, you should be changed when you leave. Your heart should be changed. That's how worship should affect you. Such an experience could never produce warm love that results in action, the one that didn't have a permanent change, that was didn't carry with it a consciousness of sin. Israel's disposition toward the covenant of God was like the morning cloud and the dew that go early away as soon as the sun comes up. The Lord desired a steadfast love, a love that lasted, and a knowledge of Himself. Sacrifices apart from His love and knowledge were meaningless. If you just did sacrifices for show, that's all it was. It didn't change your heart. It didn't change anything with God either. They didn't realize that, but that's what Hosea is telling them. The result of that, of worship like that's not authentic, is that in our personal relationship with God then becomes perfunctory and not primary. You go to church because people expect you to come. When you go to church, nothing happens. Your heart's not changed. You just showed up and you checked attendance, and that's it. That's not what God wants us to do. It's not what He wants us to do when we come on Sunday morning or Wednesday or go to our Sunday school class. He wants it to have a real impact on our heart, to be authentic worship, not perfunctory in nature, but primary in nature. And what that means is that you leave with a changed life. And I don't think I could emphasize that any more than I have in this lesson, but it's so important. And that's why I repeat it. Being at church, being in Sunday school, and reading God's Word should result in a changed heart. It ought to have an impact on how you live your life, not just so that you can check it off on a sheet and say, I did it. You participated and your heart was changed because of it. Then in verses 7 through 11, Hosea says, like Adam, they've broken the covenant. They were unfaithful to me there. Gilead is a city of wicked men stained with footprints of blood. As marauders lie in ambush for a man, so do bands of priests. They murder on the road to Shechem, committing shameful crimes. I've seen a terrible thing in the house of Israel. There Ephraim is given to prostitution, and Israel is defiled. Also you, Judah, a harvest is appointed. He's given fair enough warning here. And you notice he likens the priest to people waiting to attack people on the road and committing shameful crimes. What they want to do is they want people to bring in offerings, and then we'll sacrifice a lamb, and all will be okay. But anything change? Did anybody confess sin? Did anybody's heart change as a result of it? Did the priests think that anybody's heart was changing? No, they were too busy counting the money. They were too busy counting the offerings that were being brought in. They were all condemned. Just a note, Adam here, like Adam, you might think that's Adam in Genesis, but most scholars say that Adam was a place. We're not sure exactly where it was, but it was a place in this context rather than a person itself. And while Judah has not been the focus of most of this prophecy here, he drops this hint, perhaps coming judgment is coming towards you, Judah. Here's the bottom line for us and for any who would read these passages. The bottom line is, when religious observances fail to move men to repentance, such observances are worthless. When a nation is permeated by godlessness, when there is a lack of integrity among civil and religious leaders, sooner or later, sin brings its own judgment on that nation. The nation falls beneath the weight of its own sin. Just as surely as there's a law of gravity, when sin bears down on a nation will fall under its own weight of the sin that it commits. So, my message to you this morning is that the invitation still goes out. It goes out to all. If you're tired of the load of your sin, let Jesus come into your heart. If you desire a new life to begin, let Jesus come into your heart. Just now your doubtings give o'er. Just now you reject Him no more. Just now throw open the door. Let Jesus come into your heart. If 'tis for purity now that you sigh, let Jesus come into your heart. Fountains for cleansing are flowing nearby. Let Jesus come into your heart. If there's a tempest your voice cannot still, let Jesus come into your heart. If there's a void this world never can fill, let Jesus come into your heart. If you would join the glad songs of the blessed, let Jesus come into your heart. If you would enter the mansions of rest, let Jesus come into your heart. If you are tired of the load of your sin, let Jesus come into your heart. If you desire a new life to begin, let Jesus come into your heart. Just now your doubtings give o'er. Just now reject Him no more. Just now throw open the door. Let Jesus come into your heart. That's my invitation to you today. Let Jesus come into your heart in a real way. Have a good week.